I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping somewhere to my left. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was white, not the warm cream of my bedroom ceiling, not the soft texture I'd stared at for 37 years in the home Raymond and I built together. This ceiling was cold, institutional, the kind of white that exists only in places where people come to be fixed or to die. My chest ached, not the sharp stabbing pain that had sent me to the floor of my kitchen 6 hours earlier, but a dull throb now, like a bruise pressed too hard. My left arm was heavy, tethered to an IV pole by a thin plastic tube. I turned my head slowly. Everything felt slow, like moving through honey, and saw the heart monitor beside me, its green lines spiking in steady rhythm. "You're alive," I told myself. "You're still here." The room was quiet except for that beeping. No flowers on the nightstand, no get-well-soon balloons. No son sitting in the chair by the window, holding my hand the way I'd held his when he was 7 and had his tonsils out. I remember that night so clearly. Mark's small fingers wrapped around mine, his voice groggy from anesthesia. "Don't leave, Mommy. Promise you won't leave." I promised. I stayed all night in that horrible plastic chair, my back screaming, my eyes burning, because my boy needed me. Now I was the one in the hospital bed, and the chair by my window was empty. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The movement sent a ripple of pain through my shoulder, but I didn't care. I needed to hear his voice. Mark, my only child. My son. Surely he didn't know yet. Surely once he heard, he'd come running. I dialed his number, the same number I'd memorized when he got his first cell phone at 16. The same number I called every Sunday for years until Jessica started answering and making excuses. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then a click. "Hello?" A woman's voice. Bored, distracted. "Jessica?" My voice came out weaker than I intended. "Jessica, it's Eleanor. I'm at St. Catherine's. I had a heart scare and—" Oh, a pause. I heard something in the background. Music, maybe. Laughter. "Look, Eleanor, Mark's in a huge meeting right now, and I'm in the middle of a spa treatment. We really can't get there tonight." A spa treatment. At 8 o'clock on a Friday night. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just thought Mark would want to know that his mother is in the hospital. They're running tests. They mentioned my heart." "Right, well." Jessica's voice had that particular tone she used when she was already thinking about something else. "I'm sure the nurses can help you with whatever you need. You know how busy we are. This week has been absolutely insane with the new house and everything. The new house, the $2.1 million mansion in Prestige Estates. The one I was supposed to wire $400,000 for on Tuesday so they could close." I heard more laughter in the background, glasses clinking, someone saying something I couldn't make out. And then, clear as day, my son's voice. "Who is it, Jess?" "Your mother." Jessica's voice was muffled now, like she'd pulled the phone slightly away. "She's in the hospital or something." Jesus Christ. Mark's voice. My Mark, the boy who used to pick me wildflowers from the backyard. "Don't let her ruin our housewarming party, Jess. She just wants attention. Tell her we'll call tomorrow." Something inside me went very still. Not broken. Still. There's a difference. Broken is what happens when you shatter. When the pieces scatter and you can't find them again. Still is what happens when you gather every fragment of yourself, hold them tight, and wait. "Eleanor, you still there?" Jessica's voice was back. "Mark says we'll call you tomorrow, okay? Try to get some rest. I'm sure it's nothing serious. You've always been healthy as a horse." "Of course, dear," I heard myself say. My voice sounded strange, calm. "Don't let me interrupt your party. Tell Mark I love him." "Sure, bye." Click. I held the phone against my chest for a long moment, listening to the beeping of the heart monitor. Still beating, still alive, still here. A housewarming party. They were throwing a housewarming party for a mansion they hadn't even paid for yet. A mansion I was paying for, and they couldn't spare 15 minutes to check on me. She just wants attention. My own son, my boy. The child I carried for 9 months, the baby I nursed through fevers, the teenager I defended when his teachers said he wasn't applying himself. The young man whose wedding I paid for, whose first house I helped furnish, whose wife I welcomed into my family, even when something in my gut whispered, "Be careful." She just wants attention. I thought about Raymond then, my husband, dead 4 years now, taken by a stroke in his sleep, gone before I could say goodbye. Raymond was a detective for 32 years. He taught me things, how to listen, how to watch, how to read the space between what people say and what they mean. Ellie, he used to say, the truth isn't in the words. It's in the pauses. It's in what they don't say. It's in the way they look at you when they think you're not paying attention. I'd been paying attention for years, to Jessica's tight smile when I mentioned my will, to Brenda's helpful questions about my bank accounts, to Roger's slick assurances that I should simplify my finances, to Mark's slow drift away from me, pulled by a current I couldn't fight. I'd been paying attention. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. But now, lying in that hospital bed with the taste of fear still metallic in my mouth, I finally let myself see the truth. They weren't waiting for me to get better. They were waiting for me to die. And they'd just told me so without realizing it. I should have cried. Any normal woman would have. Any normal mother would have felt her heart crack down the middle at hearing her only child dismiss her from a party paid for with her money. But I didn't cry. I smiled. Because here's the thing about being 62 years old. You've lived long enough to know that tears are for grief, and grief is for loss. I hadn't lost anything yet. I'd simply seen something clearly for the first time. This was a test. I hadn't planned it. The heart scare was real. The fear was real. The cold hospital room was real. But the phone call? That was a test. And my son, my daughter-in-law, and everyone circling my family like vultures? They had failed. I reached over and pressed the call button for the nurse. A young woman appeared a few minutes later, her smile kind. "Mrs. Mitchell? How are you feeling?" "Better," I said, and I meant it. Much better. "When can I go home?" She looked surprised. "The doctor wants to run a few more tests in the morning. We'll probably discharge you Saturday afternoon if everything looks good." "Perfect." I folded my hands over my stomach, the picture of a sweet, tired old woman. "That will give me plenty of time." "Plenty of time for what?" I smiled at her, the same smile I'd perfected over years of parent-teacher conferences and church socials and family dinners where I pretended not to notice Jessica rolling her eyes. "Oh, nothing, dear, just some long-overdue spring cleaning." She patted my arm and left. I stared at that cold white ceiling and began to plan. They thought I was a fragile old woman who needed attention. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The taxi dropped me at the end of my driveway on Saturday afternoon, and I stood there for a long moment, just looking. 37 years I'd lived in this house. 37 years of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and summer barbecues. 37 years of Raymond coming home from work, loosening his tie in the doorway, calling out, "Ellie, I'm home." Like it was the best news he'd had all day. 37 years of watching Mark grow from a baby to a boy, to a man who now threw parties in mansions he couldn't afford while his mother lay alone in a hospital bed. The house looked the same. White colonial with black shutters, the wraparound porch Raymond built himself the summer Mark turned 10, the rose bushes I'd planted when we first moved in, smaller then, just tiny things from the nursery, now tall and thick and blooming red even in late autumn. But it didn't feel the same. I walked up the porch steps slowly, my body still tired from the hospital, my mind sharp as a blade. The front door was unlocked. I always locked it. Always. Raymond drilled that into me. 32 years as a detective, he'd seen what happened when people got comfortable, got careless. Someone had been here. I stepped inside and stopped in the foyer, listening. The house was quiet. Dust motes floated in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Everything looked normal. The coat rack by the door, the mirror where I checked my lipstick before church, the side table where I kept my keys in a little ceramic bowl Mark made in 3rd grade, lumpy and lopsided and precious. But the air was wrong. I could smell something faint beneath the familiar scent of lemon polish and old wood. Perfume, something floral and expensive. Jessica's perfume. I moved through the house slowly, room by room. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen was clean. I'd left it that way Friday morning before my heart decided to remind me I wasn't immortal. But when I reached the hallway leading to Raymond's study, I stopped. The door was closed. I never closed that door. I liked to walk past and see his desk, his chair, the framed commendations on the wall. It made me feel like he was still here somehow, just working late, about to look up and wink at me. I opened the door. Nothing seemed disturbed. His desk was neat, his leather chair pushed in, his old typewriter sitting in the corner like a monument to a different era. But the filing cabinet, the tall metal one where he kept his case files and where I now kept our important documents, had a drawer slightly open, just an inch, just enough to tell me someone had been looking. My stomach tightened, but I didn't panic. Not yet. I walked to the back window and looked out at the guest house, the converted carriage house where Brenda Holloway had been living for 3 years. Just until I get back on my feet, Eleanor. You're such an angel for offering. I hadn't offered. I hadn't. Jessica had suggested it, and Mark had begged, and I'd said yes because I was still trying to be the good mother, the welcoming mother-in-law, the woman who kept the peace at any cost. 3 years. Brenda was still here, and her feet seemed perfectly fine to me. As I watched, the back door of my house, the one that led from the mudroom directly toward the guest house, opened. Brenda stepped out. She was carrying a folder under her arm, manila thick with papers. She walked quickly, her head down, her gray hair pulled back in that severe bun she always wore. She didn't look toward the main house. She didn't know I was home. I watched her disappear into the guest house and close the door behind her. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, my hand pressed against the cold window glass, watching the guest house like it might reveal its secrets if I stared long enough. What was in that folder, Brenda? What have you been doing in my house? I didn't go confront her, not yet. Raymond taught me better than that. Never let them know you're watching, Ellie. The moment they know, they change their behavior. You learn more from people who think they're invisible. Instead, I went to the filing cabinet and checked what was missing. It took me an hour to figure it out. Bank statements, 3 months' worth, and a copy of the family trust document, the one Raymond set up before he died, the one that named me as sole trustee, the one that gave Mark his monthly stipend but kept the principal safely out of reach. Brenda had taken them to the guest house, which meant Jessica would have them by tonight. I closed the cabinet, sat down in Raymond's chair, and let myself feel the anger. Really feel it. Not the polite, muted frustration I'd allowed myself over the years. This was something older, deeper. The anger of a woman who had given everything and watched it be picked apart by ungrateful hands. They're studying me, I realized. They're looking for weaknesses, for ways in. I thought about calling the police, about marching over to the guest house and demanding answers, about calling Mark and screaming at him until my voice gave out. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I made a cup of tea, sat on the porch, and waited. They came on Sunday morning. I heard the car pull into the driveway at 11, late enough that they'd clearly slept in, probably nursing hangovers from their housewarming party. I was sitting in the living room with a book I wasn't reading, dressed in my softest cardigan, looking every inch the fragile old woman they believed me to be. The doorbell rang. My own son, ringing the doorbell of the house where he grew up. I opened the door, and there they were. Mark in khakis and a golf shirt, his face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jessica in a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, holding a bouquet of carnations wrapped in cellophane. Grocery store flowers, the kind you grab at checkout when you've forgotten a birthday. Mom. Mark stepped forward and hugged me. His arms felt stiff, mechanical. We came as soon as we could. How are you feeling? As soon as you could. It was Sunday. I'd called Friday night. I'm fine, sweetheart. I patted his back and stepped away, turning to Jessica. Hello, dear. Those are lovely. Jessica handed me the carnations with a smile that showed too many teeth. We were so worried about you, Eleanor. Mark was absolutely beside himself when he heard, beside himself at a housewarming party. Of course. Come in, come in. I ushered them inside, playing my role, the grateful mother, the forgiving saint. Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. We sat in the living room and I watched them, really watched them, the way Raymond taught me. Mark kept glancing at his phone. Jessica's eyes swept the room in that way she had, not admiring, but assessing. Calculating what everything was worth. The doctors said it was just a minor arrhythmia, I said, settling into my armchair with my coffee. Nothing to worry about. They gave me some medication, told me to reduce stress. I laughed softly. At my age, what stress do I have? That's such a relief. Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were cold. We were so worried the closing might get delayed with everything going on. The sellers are getting anxious. You know how real estate is. There it was, not even 5 minutes, and she'd steered the conversation to money. Oh, don't you worry about that. I smiled at her, my sweetest smile, my most harmless smile. I spoke to the bank on Friday morning before all this happened. The wire transfer is scheduled for Tuesday, just like we planned. $400,000 right on time. I watched Jessica's eyes light up. That spark of greed, bright and unmistakable. She squeezed my hand again, harder this time. Eleanor, you're an angel. Family takes care of family, I said. That's what Raymond always believed. Mark finally looked up from his phone. Thanks, Mom. Really, this means a lot. Does it, Mark? Does it really? I walked them to the door an hour later, accepting more stiff hugs and empty promises to visit soon. I stood on the porch and waved as they drove away, Jessica already on her phone, probably texting Brenda the good news. Then I went inside, closed the door, and let the mask fall. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. I walked to Raymond's study and sat in his chair. The leather creaked beneath me, familiar and comforting. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one with the false bottom he'd installed himself, the one where he kept his most sensitive case files. Sometimes, Ellie, he used to say, you have to think like the criminals to catch them. You have to understand how they operate, what they want, where they're vulnerable. I understood now. I understood exactly what they wanted. They wanted my money, my house, my legacy. They wanted me to die quietly and conveniently, leaving everything behind for them to pick through like vultures at a carcass. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Harold. I leaned back in Raymond's chair. It's Eleanor Mitchell, Raymond's wife. Ellie. Harold Benson's voice warmed immediately. He and Raymond had been roommates at Duke, friends for over 40 years. He'd handled our estate planning, attended our anniversary parties, stood beside me at Raymond's funeral. It's been too long. How are you? I've been better. I looked at the filing cabinet, the drawer still slightly open. I need your help, Harold, and I need you to keep it secret. Can you do that? A pause. When he spoke again, his voice was serious. What's going on, Ellie? I think my family is trying to steal from me, and I need to find out exactly how deep it goes before they realize I know. Silence on the line. Then, come to my office tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I won't. I hung up and sat in the quiet study, surrounded by Raymond's things. On the desk was a framed photograph. Mark at 8 years old, grinning at the camera, holding up a fish he'd caught at the lake. Raymond had taken that picture, Mark's first catch. He'd been so proud. I picked up the frame and looked at that little boy's face. So happy, so innocent, so sure that his parents would always be there, would always love him, would always protect him. Where did that boy go? "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I whispered to the photograph. "I don't want to do this, but you made me." I set the frame face down on the desk. Then I began to plan. I left the house at 7:30 Monday morning, before the sun had fully burned off the autumn mist that hung over Willow Creek like a veil. Brenda's lights were still off in the guest house. Good. I didn't want her to see me leave, didn't want her reporting my movements to Jessica. Let them think I was home, resting, being the good, fragile old woman they expected me to be. The drive to downtown Charlotte took 45 minutes. I used to make this drive with Raymond when he worked cases in the city. He'd be behind the wheel, one hand resting on my knee, telling me about his day in that low, gravelly voice I still heard sometimes in my dreams. We'd stop at a little diner on Providence Road for coffee and pie. Apple for him, pecan for me. The diner closed 3 years ago. Everything closes eventually. Harold's office was on the 4th floor of a modest building on Trade Street, sandwiched between an accounting firm and a dentist. No fancy lobby, no gleaming marble floors. Just a small practice run by a man who'd spent 40 years helping families protect what they'd built. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag that said Maria, smiled when I walked in. "Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Benson is expecting you. Go right in." Harold stood when I entered his office, coming around the desk to embrace me. He'd aged since Raymond's funeral, more gray in his beard, deeper lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still firm, his gaze still sharp. "Ellie." He held me at arm's length, studying my face. "You sounded serious on the phone. Sit down. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the hospital, the phone call, the party I could hear in the background while I lay alone with wires attached to my chest. I told him about Mark's words. "She just wants attention," and how they'd carved something out of me that I'd never get back. I told him about coming home to find my filing cabinet disturbed, about watching Brenda sneak out of my house with a folder under her arm, about the bank statements and trust documents that were now sitting in the guest house, being studied by people who had no right to them. I told him about Sunday's visit, the grocery store flowers, Jessica's cold fingers on my hand, the way Mark couldn't meet my eyes, the way they'd both relaxed when I promised the money would be there on Tuesday. Harold listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You said Roger Holloway has been advising you on your finances. For about 2 years now, Jessica introduced us. She said he was brilliant, that he could help me simplify things." I laughed bitterly. I should have known better. Raymond always said the word simplify in financial contexts usually means steal. Smart man, Raymond. Harold turned to his computer and typed for a moment. "I still have copies of everything we filed when we set up your estate. Let me pull the trust documents and compare them to what's currently on record." For the next hour, we went through everything. The joint checking account I'd opened with Mark 15 years ago. For emergencies, I'd told him, back when I still believed he might need to buy groceries or pay rent if something happened to me. The account had held $80,000 in January. Now it held $31,000. Withdrawal after withdrawal, all in small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, ATM fees, and point-of-sale purchases and transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. "They've been bleeding you," Harold said, his voice tight. "Slowly. Small enough that you might not notice on a monthly statement." I noticed. I stared at the numbers on the screen. I just didn't want to believe it. He pulled up another file. "This is interesting. Roger submitted paperwork 6 months ago to change the beneficiary on your Vanguard account. He wanted to add Jessica as co-beneficiary with rights of survivorship." My stomach dropped. I never signed that. I know. Harold zoomed in on the signature line. Because that's not your signature, Ellie. It's close. Whoever did this practiced. But the M in Mitchell is wrong. You loop it at the top. This one loops at the bottom. Forgery. My own family had forged my signature. It was never filed, Harold continued. The clerk at Vanguard flagged it as a mismatch and sent it back for verification. Roger never followed up. Probably realized he'd been caught and backed off. But he kept the paperwork. Almost certainly. Waiting for another opportunity. Harold clicked to another document. And here's the real prize. This was filed with the county clerk 3 weeks ago, a preliminary petition for power of attorney. It names Roger Holloway as the proposed agent and cites concerns about your cognitive decline. I read the words on the screen, each one landing like a blow. Memory lapses, confusion about financial matters, inability to manage daily affairs. I don't have cognitive decline. I know that, you know that. But if you'd actually had a serious cardiac event, if you'd been incapacitated for a few weeks, unable to advocate for yourself, they would have swooped in. I understood now, the whole picture laid out in black and white. Roger would have become my agent. He'd have access to everything. And by the time I recovered, if I recovered, it would all be gone. Harold nodded slowly. This wasn't opportunistic, Ellie. This was planned. Maybe for years. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of it settle over me. My son, my daughter-in-law, her mother, her cousin. A whole network of vipers coiled around my life, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I'd almost given them that moment. A heart scare, a few weeks in the hospital, and everything Raymond and I had built would have belonged to them. "What do you want to do?" Harold asked quietly. I looked at him, at his kind, worried face. At the diplomas on the wall, the photos of his grandchildren, the small plaque that read, "Justice delayed is justice denied." "I want to move the money," I said, "all of it. Close the joint account entirely. Mark's not getting another cent from it. Revoke the scheduled wire transfer for the mansion. Freeze the family trust distributions. I can do all of that today. But don't notify them." I leaned forward. "Not yet. The mansion closes tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I want them sitting in that realtor's office, waiting for my money to clear when they find out there is no money. I want them to feel what I felt in that hospital room, alone, abandoned, and completely blindsided." Harold was quiet for a long moment. "And Roger?" "Report the forgery to the state bar. Send a copy to the county prosecutor. But time it for tomorrow afternoon, after the closing falls through. I want it all to hit at once." "Ellie." Harold rubbed his face. "This is serious. You're talking about destroying their lives. They were planning to destroy mine." I stood up, my legs steadier than they'd been in days. "I'm just returning the favor." He looked at me, really looked, the way Raymond used to look when he knew I'd made up my mind about something. Then he smiled, just a little, just at the corners. "Raymond would be proud of you, Ellie. You know that." I thought about my husband, his steady hands, his quiet strength, his absolute, unwavering belief that the truth would always come out if you were patient enough to wait for it. "I know," I said. "That's what's getting me through this." And I drove home through the afternoon traffic, my mind buzzing with everything Harold and I had set in motion. Wire transfers reversed, accounts frozen, letters drafted, a countdown clock ticking toward tomorrow at 2 o'clock, when Mark and Jessica would be sitting in a realtor's office watching their dreams collapse. I pulled into my driveway at 4:15. The sun was starting its slow descent toward the tree line, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house looked peaceful, normal, the kind of house where nothing bad ever happened. I was halfway to the front door when I felt it. That prickle at the back of my neck, the one Raymond always said to trust. I turned slowly. Brenda was standing at the guest house window, watching me. Our eyes met across the distance, 50 feet of grass and garden between us, and I could still see her expression. Suspicious, calculating, trying to figure out where I'd been all day. I smiled at her. I lifted my hand and waved, a friendly, cheerful wave, the kind a sweet old woman gives to her beloved houseguest. Brenda didn't wave back. She just stood there watching, her face unreadable. I turned and walked inside, still smiling. Go ahead and report this to Jessica, Brenda. Tell her I was out all day. Tell her I looked happy. Let them wonder. Let them worry. By this time tomorrow, they'll have much bigger problems than where I went on a Monday afternoon. I locked the door behind me, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat down to wait. I spent Monday afternoon preparing a feast, not because I wanted to, not because I enjoyed cooking for people who were planning to rob me blind, but because Raymond taught me that the best traps are the ones your prey walks into willingly, hungrily, without ever suspecting the jaws are about to snap shut. So I cooked. Roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, Mark's favorite from when he was a boy. Garlic mashed potatoes, creamy and rich, the way Jessica always complimented while mentally calculating how many calories she'd have to burn off later. Fresh green beans from the farmer's market. Homemade rolls that filled the house with the smell of warm bread and butter and everything good and safe and familial. I set the dining room table with my mother's china, the good stuff, the delicate white plates with the blue floral border that only came out for Thanksgiving and Christmas and funerals. I lit candles. I arranged fresh flowers from the garden in the centerpiece I'd bought on my honeymoon in Charleston 40 years ago. Let them think this was a celebration. Let them think I was softening in my old age, getting sentimental, ready to hand over the keys to the kingdom. They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. Mark came through the door first, already looking uncomfortable. He'd never been good at deception. That was Jessica's talent, not his. He kissed my cheek and muttered something about the house smelling amazing. His breath already carried the faint sweetness of alcohol, liquid courage for the performance ahead. Jessica followed, radiant in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. She hugged me like we were the best of friends, her perfume enveloping me in a cloud of gardenias and lies. Eleanor, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble. We could have just ordered in. Nonsense. I patted her arm. Family dinners are important. We don't have enough of them anymore. Brenda arrived next, letting herself in through the back door like she owned the place. She'd dressed up for the occasion, a silk blouse, pearl earrings, lipstick the color of dried blood. She nodded at me with that thin smile she always wore, the one that never reached her eyes. Eleanor, the house looks lovely. Thank you, Brenda. So nice of you to join us. From my own guest house that I pay for, where you've been stealing my documents. And then Roger, Jessica's cousin, the financial advisor, with his slicked back hair and his 2 white teeth and his handshake that lingered just a moment too long. He brought a bottle of wine, expensive, probably purchased with money that had somehow originated from my accounts. Mrs. Mitchell. He smiled that oily smile. Always a pleasure. Roger, how thoughtful of you. The last to arrive was Tiffany. My granddaughter slipped through the front door quietly, almost apologetically, like she wasn't sure she belonged. At 16, she was caught in that awkward space between childhood and adulthood, too old for dolls, too young for the schemes her parents were running. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no pretense. She was the only one who hugged me like she meant it. Hi, Grandma. Hello, sweetheart. I held her a moment longer than necessary. I'm glad you came. We gathered in the dining room, and I watched them arrange themselves around the table like pieces on a chessboard. Jessica took the seat closest to me. Better to whisper, better to manipulate. Brenda sat beside her daughter, their shoulders nearly touching, a united front. Roger positioned himself across from me, where he could make eye contact, where he could gauge my reactions. Mark sat at the far end, already refilling his wine glass, already checking out. And Tiffany. My Tiffany. She sat in the corner seat, as far from the center of action as possible, her eyes moving from face to face like she was watching a play she didn't quite understand. I served the food, complimented the wine, asked about the mansion. You must be so excited for tomorrow's closing, and watched Jessica practically vibrate with anticipation. We really can't thank you enough, Eleanor. Jessica placed her hand over mine. This house is going to be everything we've dreamed of. The neighborhood is just perfect for entertaining. And the schools, Brenda added. Such good schools in that district, for when you have more children. I saw Mark flinch slightly at that. More children, more expenses, more reasons to drain the family accounts. Speaking of the future, I said, setting down my fork, I wanted to talk to all of you about something important. The table went quiet. I could feel their attention sharpen, 5 pairs of eyes locking onto me like predators spotting prey. I've been thinking a lot lately. The hospital scare made me realize I'm not going to live forever. I laughed softly, self-deprecatingly. I know, none of us like to think about these things, but I'm 62 years old. Raymond is gone. It's time I got my affairs in order. Mom, Mark started. Let me finish, sweetheart. I held up my hand. I've decided to update my will, simplify things, make sure there are no surprises for anyone when the time comes. I watched Roger's eyes light up like I just handed him a winning lottery ticket. That's very wise, Mrs. Mitchell. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with false concern. Estate planning is so important, especially for someone in your situation. The trust Raymond set up is quite complex. I've actually been meaning to talk to you about streamlining some of those provisions. Have you? I tilted my head, all innocent curiosity. What did you have in mind? Well, for instance, the irrevocable nature of the trust creates certain limitations. If we restructured it, made you and perhaps Jessica co-trustees, you'd have much more flexibility with the assets. There it is. The play, the con, make Jessica co-trustee, and suddenly my money becomes their money. That's an interesting idea, Roger. I smiled at him. We should discuss it further, after the holidays, perhaps? Jessica squeezed my hand again. Eleanor, you're so smart to be thinking about these things. We just want what's best for you. No, sweetheart. You want what's best for you. There's a difference. I glanced at Tiffany. She wasn't eating. Her fork moved the food around her plate, but nothing reached her mouth. Her eyes were fixed on the tablecloth, her jaw tight. She knew. Maybe not the details, but she knew something was wrong. She could feel the wrongness of this dinner, the falseness of the smiles, the hunger barely concealed beneath the polite conversation. Good girl. They left at 9:30, full of food and wine and premature victory. Jessica kissed both my cheeks. Brenda nodded her approval. Roger shook my hand and promised to send over some paperwork for me to review. Mark hugged me stiffly and couldn't quite meet my eyes. But Tiffany lingered. I was in the kitchen, loading dishes into the sink, when I heard her footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant. Grandma? I turned. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, though the house was warm. Yes, sweetheart? She didn't say anything for a long moment. Just looked at me with those dark eyes. Mark's eyes, my eyes, Raymond's eyes. And I saw something there that broke my heart a little. Guilt, shame. The dawning awareness that the adults in her life were not who they pretended to be. Are you okay? Her voice was barely a whisper. I mean, really okay? Not just hospital okay, but okay? I set down the dish I was holding and crossed the kitchen to her. She was taller than me now. When had that happened? But she still seemed so small, so young, so trapped in a family that had lost its way. I reached up and touched her cheek. Her skin was soft, still carrying the last traces of childhood. I'm okay, Tiffany, I promise. It's just... She bit her lip. Sometimes I hear Mom and Dad talking, and Grandma Brenda. They say things about you, about your money, about after. After I die. They're already dividing the spoils. What kind of things? But she shook her head, pulling back slightly. I don't know. I don't want to know. I wanted to make sure you're okay. Because you're always nice to me, even when. She trailed off. Even when no one else is. Even when my parents use you. Even when I should speak up and don't. I pulled her into a hug. She stiffened at first, then melted into it, her face pressed against my shoulder. You're a good girl, Tiffany. I stroked her hair. Remember that, no matter what happens, you're a good girl, and I love you very much. She nodded against my shoulder, but didn't speak. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were wet. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed, and managed a small smile. Good night, Grandma. Good night, sweetheart. Drive safe. I watched her walk out to the car, where Jessica was already honking the horn impatiently. Tiffany climbed into the back seat, and the car pulled away, taillights disappearing down the dark driveway. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after they left. The house was quiet. The candles had burned down to stubs. The good china sat in the sink, waiting to be washed. Everything smelled like rosemary and betrayal. At least one of them still has a conscience, I whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow the trap would spring. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight I let myself grieve, just for a moment, for the family I thought I had, and the granddaughter who might still be saved. I wasn't there to see it happen, but I've imagined it 1,000 times since. The realtor's office. One of those sleek, modern spaces with glass walls and chrome fixtures and inspirational quotes about home printed on canvas. The kind of place designed to make you feel like you're about to step into the life you've always deserved. Mark and Jessica arrived early. Of course they did. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The culmination of years of scheming, flattering, manipulating, and waiting for the old woman to loosen her grip on the family fortune. Jessica wore her best power suit, navy blue, tailored perfectly, with heels that clicked against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to victory. Mark wore the sports coat she'd picked out for him, the one that made him look almost successful, almost like the man she'd convinced herself she'd married. They sat in leather chairs across from the realtor, a woman named Deborah with a practiced smile and a folder full of documents. The title company representative was there too, a nervous young man with glasses who kept refreshing his computer screen. The sellers are very motivated, Deborah said, sliding papers across the table. They've already signed everything on their end. Once the wire clears, you'll have the keys by 5 o'clock. Jessica squeezed Mark's hand. This was it. The $1 million mansion in Prestige Estates. 6,000 square feet of gleaming hardwood and granite countertops and a backyard pool that would look stunning in her Instagram posts. The wire should have posted by now, the title representative said, frowning at his screen. Let me just check the status. Jessica pulled out her phone and texted Brenda. Almost there. Pop the champagne. Brenda's response came immediately. So excited. Call me the second it's done. Minutes passed. The title representative clicked his mouse, frowned, clicked again. That's strange, he murmured. I'm not seeing the incoming transfer. Jessica's smile flickered. There must be a delay. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, she scheduled it days ago. Try refreshing. I've refreshed 3 times, ma'am. There's no pending transfer from that account. Mark shifted in his seat. Let me call her. He pulled out his phone and dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Hi, you've reached Eleanor Mitchell. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll call you back. Have a blessed day. Mark hung up, tried again. Same result. She's not answering. Jessica's jaw tightened. Try the house line. He did. No answer. The realtor and the title representative exchanged glances, the kind of glance that said, we've seen this before, and This isn't going to end well. I'm sure it's just a technical issue, Deborah said smoothly. Why don't we take a short break while you sort this out? I'll get everyone some water. But Jessica was already on her feet, pacing the glass-walled conference room like a caged animal. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not after everything they'd done, everything they'd planned, everything they'd sacrificed to get to this moment. Mark's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Not Mom. A number he didn't recognize at first. Then he did. The bank. Hello? Mr. Mitchell? This is Patricia Owens, Client Services Manager at First Carolina Bank. I'm calling regarding some changes to the accounts associated with Eleanor Mitchell. Mark's face went pale. What kind of changes? Jessica stopped pacing. She moved closer, trying to hear. Mrs. Mitchell came in this morning and made several significant adjustments to her accounts. She's revoked all scheduled transfers, including a wire for $400,000 that was set to process today. She's also closed the joint checking account she shared with you and requested that all funds be transferred to a new account in her name only. Mark's hand was shaking. She closed the account? Yes, sir. Additionally, she's instructed us to freeze all distributions from the Raymond Mitchell Family Trust until further notice. As the named beneficiary, you'll no longer be receiving your monthly stipend effective immediately. The phone slipped from Mark's fingers. Jessica caught it. This is Jessica Mitchell, she snapped into the receiver. There must be some mistake. My mother-in-law is elderly. She's been having health issues. She's clearly not in her right mind. Ma'am, I met with Mrs. Mitchell personally this morning. I can assure you she was fully competent and very clear about her instructions. If you have concerns about her mental capacity, you're welcome to pursue that through the appropriate legal channels. But as of today, these changes are final. You can't do this. That money was promised to us. We have a contract. The line went dead. Jessica stared at the phone in her hand. Her face had gone from pink to red to something approaching purple. She's cut us off. Her voice was barely a whisper. The crazy old bitch has cut us off. Mark sat motionless in his chair, staring at nothing. The realtor and title representative had retreated to the far side of the room, pretending to examine paperwork. Jessica was already dialing again. Brenda picked up on the first ring. Is it done? Do you have the keys? The money's gone, Mother. Jessica's voice cracked. She canceled everything. The wire, the account, the trust, everything. Silence on the other end. Then, that's impossible. She promised. She sat at that dinner table last night and promised. Well, she lied. Jessica was shouting now, not caring who heard. Just like she's been lying this whole time, playing the sweet little old lady while she... Jessica. Brenda's voice had changed, gone flat. I just got a delivery. A man came to the door with an envelope. What envelope? It's a formal eviction notice, 30 days. She's kicking me out of the guest house. Jessica's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Roger. Call me now. I'm in serious trouble. She called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice high and panicked. The State Bar just contacted me. Someone filed a complaint about the POA documents, and the county prosecutor's office wants to meet with me about potential fraud charges. Jessica, they have copies of everything. The beneficiary forms, the signature samples, all of it. Someone gave them a whole file. Who? Who would? But she already knew. They all knew. Mark drove like a man possessed, weaving through traffic, running yellow lights, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jessica sat beside him, silent for once, her mind racing through possibilities. They could contest this, claim Eleanor was senile, get a doctor to sign off on cognitive decline, fight this in court. But even as she planned, she knew the truth. Eleanor had outmaneuvered them. The sweet, fragile, foolish old woman had somehow seen everything, documented everything, and burned it all down in a single morning. How did she know? Mark whispered. How did she know? Jessica didn't answer. She was thinking about the dinner, about Eleanor's calm smile, about the way she'd talked about updating her will, simplifying her affairs. She was testing us. The whole time, she was testing us. They turned onto Eleanor's street, the familiar driveway, the white colonial with the black shutters. But something was different. There was a taxi in the driveway, engine running, suitcases on the porch, 3 of them, expensive, new. And standing beside them, dressed in a cream-colored linen suit with a silk scarf around her neck, looking more alive than she had in years, was Eleanor. She turned as their car screeched to a stop. And she smiled, not the polite, placating smile she'd worn for years, not the tired smile of a woman too worn down to fight. This was the smile of a woman who had won. Jessica was out of the car before Mark had even put it in park. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She stormed across the lawn, her heels sinking into the grass, her face twisted into something ugly. The real Jessica, finally, with all the masks stripped away. Her designer suit was wrinkled now, her perfect hair coming loose from its pins. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman watching her carefully constructed world collapse. I stood by my suitcases and let her come. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She stopped 3 feet from me, chest heaving. "We had a contract. We had a closing. The sellers are walking away. We're going to lose our deposit. We're going to be ruined." "The deposit Brenda gave you from her retirement fund?" I tilted my head. "The one you told her I'd reimburse? That's between you and your mother, dear. It's not my concern." Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. A second car came screeching into the driveway. Brenda's silver sedan, driven with the reckless fury of a woman who'd just lost her free housing. She stumbled out, waving the eviction notice like a weapon. "Eleanor Mitchell, you vindictive old hag. 30 days? After everything I've done for this family?" "Everything you've done?" I laughed. It felt good to laugh. "You mean living rent-free in my guest house for 3 years while spying on my finances? Stealing my bank statements? Feeding information to your daughter so she could figure out how to get her hands on my money?" Brenda's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have cameras, Brenda. Raymond installed them years ago. I have footage of you letting yourself into my house, going through my filing cabinet, walking out with folders tucked under your arm." I smiled sweetly. "Would you like to see the timestamps? They're quite detailed." Brenda's mouth snapped shut. Jessica's phone rang. She glanced at it, Roger's name flashing on the screen, and silenced it with a stab of her finger. It rang again immediately. "You need to answer that," I said. "Roger's having quite a day. Something about fraud charges and a state bar investigation. He's going to need a good lawyer, which is ironic, considering he is one, or was." Mark had finally gotten out of the car. He stood by the driver's door, one hand resting on the roof like he needed it to stay upright. He hadn't said a word. He looked like a man who'd just watched his house burn down with everything he owned inside. I walked toward him slowly. My son, my only child. The baby I'd held in my arms 38 years ago, promising to love him forever, promising to protect him from everything. I couldn't protect him from himself. "Mark," my voice was gentle now, "look at me." He raised his eyes. They were wet. "Do you know why I did this? Do you understand?" He shook his head, a small broken movement. "Friday night," I said. "I was lying in a hospital bed alone, scared, hooked up to machines. I called my son because I needed to hear his voice. And do you know what I heard instead?" He flinched. I heard a party. I heard laughter and glasses clinking and music playing. And then I heard you, my son, my Mark, say, "Don't let her ruin our housewarming party, Jess. She just wants attention." A tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "I wasn't asking for attention, Mark. I was asking for my son, and he wasn't there." I took a breath. "You stopped being there a long time ago. I just didn't want to see it." Jessica pushed forward, trying to get between us, Eleanor, look, we can work this out. We're family. I know things got a little complicated, but we love you. We've always loved you. If you'll just unfreeze the trust and reconsider. Jessica, I held up my hand. Stop. She stopped. I know about the power of attorney documents Roger prepared. I know about the conservatorship petition. I know you were planning to have me declared incompetent the moment I showed any sign of weakness. I let that land, watched her face cycle through denial, fear, and finally, grudging recognition. You weren't waiting for me to die. You were waiting for me to become helpless enough to control. That's not. Family doesn't treat family like an ATM with a heartbeat. I turned away from her. The mansion money is gone. I'm using it to fund a 2-month cruise through the Mediterranean. First-class cabin, all the amenities. I've always wanted to see the Greek islands. Jessica made a strangled sound. Brenda, you have 30 days to vacate the guest house. I suggest you start packing. Roger is going to be dealing with his own legal problems, so don't expect much help from that quarter. I glanced at my watch. The taxi driver is very patient, but I don't want to miss my flight. You can't do this, Brenda hissed. You can't just. I can. I did. It's done. The sound of another car made us all turn. A small Honda pulled into the driveway. The driver was a teenage girl I didn't recognize. One of Tiffany's friends, probably. But the passenger door flew open, and Tiffany came running across the lawn, her face streaked with tears. Grandma! Grandma! Wait! She crashed into me with the full force of her 16 years, her arms wrapping around me tight enough to hurt. I held her, stroking her hair, feeling her shoulders shake with sobs. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong. I should have said something. I should have told you what they were planning. Shh. I cupped her face in my hands, forcing her to look at me. Tiffany, listen to me. You are not responsible for your parents' choices. You are not responsible for any of this. But I knew. You're 16 years old. You were put in an impossible position by adults who should have known better. I wiped her tears with my thumbs. You came to me that night after dinner. You asked if I was okay. That took courage. She sniffled. It didn't feel like courage. It never does. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope I'd prepared that morning. This is for you. She took it with trembling hands. What is it? Your grandfather and I set up a college fund for you the year you were born. We never told your parents. Raymond thought it was important that you have something that was just yours. It's grown quite a bit over the years. I smiled at her. That money is in your name only. They can't touch it. When you turn 18, it's yours. Use it to build a life you're proud of. Tiffany clutched the envelope to her chest, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Grandma. I hugged her one more time, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, memorizing the feel of her arms around me. Then I let go and turned to my son. Mark stood where he'd been standing the whole time, frozen, broken, watching his world come apart. Mark. I walked to him, stood close enough to touch, though I didn't. I'm not cutting you off forever. The door isn't locked, but you have to be the one to walk through it. I glanced at Jessica, who was still sputtering behind us. Not her. You. When you're ready to be my son again, really my son, you know where to find me. He opened his mouth, closed it. The tears were flowing freely now. I love you, I said. I've always loved you. That's why this hurts so much. The taxi driver honked gently. I turned and walked to the car, my suitcases already loaded in the trunk. I climbed into the back seat and closed the door. Through the window, I watched them. Jessica screaming at Mark, demanding he do something, anything. Brenda slumped against her car, staring at the eviction notice in her hands. Roger's name lighting up Jessica's phone again and again, unanswered. And Tiffany, standing apart from all of them, clutching my letter to her chest, watching me with those dark eyes that reminded me so much of Raymond. Mark hadn't moved. He stood in the driveway, his hands at his sides, looking at me through the taxi window. I raised my hand. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. I see you. I love you. I'm leaving. The taxi pulled away. I didn't look back. The flight to Rome left at 7 that evening. I had a window seat, first class, champagne already poured before we even took off. Below me, the lights of Charlotte grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely into the darkness. I thought about Raymond, about what he would say if he could see me now. Ellie, you magnificent woman. I always knew you had it in you. I smiled and raised my glass to the empty seat beside me. To new chapters, I whispered. The plane climbed higher, carrying me toward the Mediterranean, toward the Greek islands, toward a future I was finally choosing for myself. Behind me, in a driveway in Willow Creek, a family was falling apart. But that wasn't my story anymore. This was.